Episode 4: How the Druids inspired the Celtic Saints. In this latest episode of the podcast, where I'm revisiting and rewalking parts of the journey I took that made up the Return to My Trees book, I'll be wandering the canal footpath between Newport and Basildon, and I'll be delving back into the history of the ancient Celtic saints, and maybe did they get their inspiration from the Celtic Druids of centuries before? The entrance to the Monmouthshire canal feels like another threshold, an escape from the frenetic traffic. Gone is the deafening roar of the cars and the edginess of inner city Newport. It's been muffled by the calmness of water trickling through the canal, an abundance of reeds, bushes and moss growing on its sides, and thick woodlands rising up above it. I've stumbled upon another threshold, this one being where the Crindai Pill, a tributary of the Usk, meets the Monmouthshire and Brecon canals. 100 years ago, this was a hub of industrial activity, and as much of a transportation logjam as the Bringlass tunnels are today. This was where two different parts of the canal came together and connected to Newport docks. Back then, the canal barges transported iron and coal, part of the great logistical machine that exported Welsh raw materials all around the world. This nexus of the canal industry would have been noisy, filthy, and full of early city life. The canal system gradually fell into disrepair, and it was replaced in importance first by the railways and later the roads. Today, despite the low hum of the M4 motorway passing through the tunnels above, this canal feels tranquil. Above me is Achderin, means slope of the ash tree, a nature reserve, 32-acre expanse of mixed deciduous woodland. It provides an important natural buffer of biodiversity between the residential neighbourhood of the same name that sits on the hill above and the M4. Alongside the eponymous ash trees, the nature reserve is home to birch, cherry and oak, as well as hazel and hawthorn growing beneath the canopies. The reserve also has a 5-acre ancient wildflower meadow and is home to 50 different bird species, as well as grass snakes, frogs and newts. In summer, the spotted orchid and yellow rattle bring swathes of colour to the meadow. Located close to the border with England and shaped by centuries of immigration, Newport is one of the most anglicised parts of Wales. Because of this, Old Welsh place names like Achderin have been reinterpreted and adapted to match the local dialect. Here, the locals call it Alterine, making it sound like something out of Star Trek. Newport's current generation of residents can be forgiven, though, for their mangled interpretation of the Welsh language. It's been going on around here for at least 1,000 years. Take Newport's own patron saint. His name was Gwynllyw Varfog. In English, however, he became known as Wallace the Warrior or Wallace the Bearded, a name that could have been lifted straight out of Monty Python, if you think about it. Today, Newport's cathedral, once a monastery he was said to have built, is known as St. Wallace. Gwynllyw ruled a chunk of South Wales at the end of the 5th century and is believed to have heralded from a storied Celtic lineage. He was supposedly descended from Maxen Wedlig, king of the Britons, and possibly also a Roman emperor, on his father's side, and Cynedda, a revered Celtic ruler, on his mother's. Gwynllyw was quite the rogue, even by medieval standards. In one account, written around 1086, the king was described as given up to carnal allurements and frequently instigated his guards to robbery and plunder, and lived altogether contrary to what is right and disgraced his life with crimes. Harsh words, you might think, but consider his approach to wooing. At the height of his powers, Gwynllyw took a fancy to Gwladys, the daughter of King Brychan of Brycheiniog, the neighbouring kingdom to the north of his lands. Gwladys was quite the beauty. King Arthur had a crush on her, according to one story, and it would seem she also had a thing for bad boy kings. Her father Brychan was none too impressed with Gwynllyw. You suspect his reputation went before him. Given the parental pushback, some suitors might have suggested, meeting up for coffee or a nice brunch with their prospective father-in-law as a way of currying favour. Not Gwynllyw. He led a raiding party of 300 men into Brycheiniog to abduct Gwladys. This resulted in a pitched battle with Brychan's men that only ended when King Arthur turned up and sided with Gwynllyw. Or so the story goes. To be honest, we don't really know the truth about Gwynllyw's courtship methods or anything else about him. We can't be certain that King Arthur was on hand to help out, or whether he even existed. The same is true for the whole of Welsh history during the period between when the Romans departed and the Normans arrived from France in the 11th century. As the famous Welsh historian Gwyn Williams described in When Was Wales, from the 5th century, the western regions of Britain drop out of history. They do not climb back in until the 9th century. These ages are dark ages because we cannot see anything clearly. The few contemporary histories detailing these 500 years in Wales draw on a mix of ecclesiastic narratives, folklore, and good old parochial bias. The history was revised to reflect the sentiments, sentimentality, and prejudice of those writing it. Which brings us back to Gwynllyw and Gwladys. They might have lived out their days in complete Dark Ages obscurity if it hadn't been for their lone offspring, a son named Cadoc, who was determined not to emulate his father's less endearing tendencies. The signs were there from the start. In the days leading up to Cadoc's birth, around 497 AD, strange lights shone in his parents' house, and the cellars miraculously filled up with food. Then an angel turned up to announce his birth, and a holy well sprang up for his baptism. Even better, it started spewing wine. Cadoc, clearly, was destined to be an important holy man. Gwynllyw sent his son off to be tutored by the monks at Caerwent, the Dark Ages version of a Swiss finishing school. It was said that his piety inspired both Gwladys and Gwynllyw to embrace Christianity and even take vows of celibacy. However, so intense was their physical attraction to each other that Gwynllyw and Gwladys found it impossible to remain together. The only certain way to stay celibate was to become hermits. This is how St. Wullas came about. Gwynllyw founded a monastery at Newport, which is now the cathedral. Gwladys departed for the hills, never to see her husband or son again. Clearly, there's quite a lot of artistic license when it comes to recounting the lives of early Welsh saints. Indeed, as one historian, Madeline Gray, wrote in an article in a local newspaper, like the stories of Arthur and the Mabinogion, their lives have been rewritten many times to suit changing values and changing circumstances. Given how little we know about this period of history, I can't help but toy with some ambitious wishful thinking. Maybe the Druids didn't disappear in the Roman purge after all. Instead, could they have morphed over the centuries into the early Celtic Christian saints? After all, this was an age when pagan and Christian traditions were celebrated together and sometimes merged into one. Many of the early saints were referred to as Druids. Illtyd, still one of the most important saints in Welsh Christianity, and a student of St. Cadoc's, was by descent a most wise Druid, according to a life of St. Samson of Dol, the earliest known surviving biography of a British Celtic saint, which was written about the end of the 6th century. Wales's own patron saint, Dewi, David, also gained fame because of his supernatural abilities. Once, in mid-Wales, he commanded the ground beneath his feet to rise up so he could preach to a crowd. Dewi also possessed what you might call a true druidic connection to nature. His emblem was a white dove, and he extolled the monks in the abbey he founded to care for the natural world, even going so far as to ban them from using cattle to pull their ploughs. He also made them take a vow of chastity, prompting local rivals to parade naked women in front of the abbey to tempt the monks. But that's another story. Then there was Melangell. She was the daughter of an Irish king who renounced her status and headed across the Irish Sea to pursue a spiritual existence in Wales. In the year 604 AD, she was praying devoutly when she encountered the hunting party of the Prince of Powys, which was chasing a hare. The poor creature hid inside the sleeves of Melangell's garment. When the prince called to his hounds to catch the hare, they recoiled in fear of her aura and ran away. The prince also was in awe of her holy power and granted Melangell all the lands where the hunt had taken place as a sanctuary. From then until her death 36 years later, no animal was killed on her land. Of course, not all the Celtic saints had such a pure reputation. Even after his commitment to a hermit life, Gwynllyws' notoriety still endured. He was adopted as the patron saint of pirates because of his exploits terrorising ships in the Bristol Channel, and was celebrated centuries later by the great Welsh buccaneer of them all, Sir Henry Morgan, himself a later inspiration for all sorts of popular cultural homages, ranging from a Donald Duck comic book to an Errol Flynn movie and a brand of spiced rum. So, the next time you find yourself partying with the cap'n, as the advertising slogan goes, raise a glass to Gwynllyw. I think he would have approved. I'm following the canal path that runs adjacent to the M4 motorway, and it's on a walking trail known as 14 Locks, which is in honour of the Cefn Flight, an intricate engineering feat employed by the canal builders that allowed barges to navigate a particularly tricky part of the descent between Crumlin and Llundain, dropping 50 metres in just 700 metres. The Cefn Flight remains the steepest canal descent in the whole of the United Kingdom. The mastermind behind the Cefn Flight was a young engineer from the English Midlands called Thomas Dadford Jr. He had followed in his father's footsteps, playing leading roles in constructing the Glamorganshire Canal and the Stourbridge Canal in England. Dadford Jr. was said to be a prodigious worker, his time occupied by multiple projects. However, while he was pretty good at canals, turns out his forte wasn't tunnels. His Southnet tunnel on the Leinster Canal collapsed in 1795, and another, the Ashford Tunnel on the Brecon and Abergavenny Canal, collapsed during reconstruction. His reputation, despite everything he'd done before, never recovered. Actually, I'm facing another tunnel now, which I'm about to go under. I'm going to try and avoid the hum of the traffic of the motorway as it rumbles above. But this is going to take me up on the Seoi Valley Trail, I believe, towards the visitor centre of the 14 Locks. And from there, I'm going to take a bit of a detour, because I quite like doing that from time to time, and because I want to get to the village of Basleg, and so I'm going to cut through a housing estate and a tiny little area of woodland. I'm going to cross the river and then follow it down to Basleg. Looking now on my OS map, I realise there's probably an easier way I could have done, because actually the official trail goes up a bit further north, then drops down through Rogerstone. But hey, I have made my bed, so to speak, on this particular walk, so off I go.
You've been listening to Return to My Trees, a Tramping podcast. It was narrated by Matthew Yeomans and edited by Dullan Yeomans. The musical interludes are by the folk duo Filkin's Drift. Join us for the next episode, where we delve even deeper into the woodlands of Wales.